Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Picture this, you're a Grinding Gear Games developer and you get the odd email coming through that you think, you know what, I can put that one off until after Christmas. And then you come back to the office and the game is on fire. This is what happened after the patch 0.4.0c went live. Now 0.4.0c went live almost a full week before Christmas. I did a video on it and I said that this was a gigabuff to the incursion mechanic. People said at the time, you know, I think you're overreacting to this. This mechanic is still trash. Well, it turned out I was wrong in my assessment of this. I underestimated how big this would be. This wasn't a gigabuff. This is a terabuff or an exabuff. This is one of the biggest buffs that's ever been seen, and it has gone and pretty much completely broken the Trade League economy. However, it was one of those buff patches that wasn't apparent for quite some time, just how significant it was. There's a couple of things that are notable here. One that people really missed when this came up was Spymaster rooms now apply the following temple modifier, and a top tier 30% increased effect of temple modifiers applied by garrisons, commanders, armories, smithies, and legion barracks, i.e. a 30% boost to room buffs that stack multiplicatively with each other. This ended up being the straw that broke the league economy's back. A transformed or completely broken Trade League economy isn't necessarily always a bad thing though. We'll come back to this point later. Some people are going to enjoy this, some people won't. The key thing is that loot that you get from killing regular monsters in the game is pretty much all devalued. I'll provide some evidence for that later, but you're going to need to kill monsters that drop special loot. Otherwise, you're basically not going to be able to save up for anything that's in hot demand. Now, last night, Grinding Gear Games put out an emergency patch to deal with some of this, and they were dealing with a particular abuse case and also making what you might term the core game flow interaction with this incursion mechanic feel a bit better. This involved disabling the ability for Vaal beacons in the zone called Holten to generate energized crystals. Holten is one of the last zones in one of the interludes, and it was something that until you were about character level 73 or 74, you could simply keep resetting that zone, and each time you reset the zone at the right checkpoint, you would very, very quickly get to the incursion beacon, and that would allow you to generate an entire new temple. Now, there are a number of ways to take extreme advantage of this in group play, but even if it was not in group play, even if it was done solo, it was a very, very broken mechanic. And what it allowed you to do was generate more temples than you would ever get through natural gameplay. So there's been 3 changes here, one of which is intended solely as a temporary thing. Firstly, the Holten strategy is halted. This is no longer going to work at all, and Grinding Gear Games have later plans to fix this in a more permanent way that probably entails redesigning the geometry of the Holten area. This is something that's come up in POE1 as well with quarry farming, and it's something that's continually caused problems in that game. The second thing that's coming up here is that they're increasing the frequency you can access the incursion temple if you just play the game naturally. So if you're running 6 modified tier 15 maps, you will now get twice as many temple runs as you were getting before. One of the main reasons they're doing this is because the time that you were able to spend in the temple was decreasing the more difficult the content that you were running, and the loot wasn't commensurate with that. Finally, there's also a number of boosts to monsters that are found in the temple, both to their items and also to the amount of loot that they drop. But this is only going to apply in higher tier temples, which means that some of the lower tier shenanigans aren't going to work anymore. Or more accurately, they're not going to be as lucrative as they were. The key thing though is that it's still possible to stack up a lot of multiplicative increases to loot through the use of the temple. It's just going to take you longer to get that all set up. However, by this point, the cat had really been let out of the bag. I want to present some evidence as to just how much inflation there's been in Path of Exile 2's economy. This is going to be looking at things that do not come from the incursion mechanics of the Vaal temple at all. So I want to start with fracturing orbs. Fracturing orbs are something that crafters use, and fracturing orbs come from killing cleansed monsters. This means that they come from exploring the Atlas normally. So you're going around the Atlas, you're looking for areas that have got congealed corruption, you go and you headshot the boss of that zone, and then you go and clear out all of the rest of the area, and some of the monsters will drop fracturing orbs. So these are a reward for ignoring the incursion temple and instead for running more maps. Here's what they look like in price against the Divine Orb. Now, this looks like it's a graph going down. The thing is that this is Divine Orb to Fracturing Orb in reverse. So early on, you'll see that one Divine Orb is 7.6 Fracturing Orbs. Then, over time, they get closer to parity. So by the time that we get to the 20th of December, one Divine Orb is buying 1.6 Fracturing Orbs. By the time we get to Christmas, they're actually at parity. Now, one Fracturing Orb is 3.5 Divine Orbs. So they have absolutely exploded in price here. Next, I'll take a look at the top end crafting omens. And here you've got a very similar story that's repeated amongst the Omen of Sinistral Annulment, Sinistral Erasure, Dextral Annulment, Dextral Erasure, and the Omen of Light and the Omen of Whittling. And for that matter, also the Omen of Sanctification. All of these quite rare omens have exploded in price over the last 7 days against the Divine Orb, and they've increased even more against the Chaos Orb or the Exalted Orb. What about a couple of things that are boss drops? Rakiata's Flow. Rakiata's Flow is up to 42 divines. Just a week ago, just on Christmas Day, it was in the 25 divine range. So imagine that you're someone who's playing the game normally, mostly ignoring all the shenanigans that are going on with the temple generating a lot of loot for the top 1 or 2% of the player base, and you're saving up for your Rakiata's Flow, you're 3/4 of the way there. Then this week comes, and suddenly you go from being 3/4 of the way to your next upgrade to set back to only halfway to your next upgrade. Welcome to inflation. The same thing's the case if you look at Uhtred's Augury. This has gone up from 35 divines a week ago to 107 today. And the same thing has been true for boss access fragments as well. So Victorious Fate, one of the Spymaster access tokens, this one's exploded in price. Ancient Collarbones from Abyss content, these have exploded in price. Pretty much everything that doesn't come out of the temple has gone up in price a lot. What we're seeing here is not an increase in the value of an Ancient Collarbone. What we're seeing here is a calamitous decrease in the value of Divine Orbs, because there's just simply more of them in the Trade League economy. And as a result, those of you who had most of your league wealth tied up in items like Divine Orbs, this is going to be quite the squeeze. So is Hotfix 12 really going to change this? No, it's not. The key thing is that 040C added so much additional loot to the league economy to specific top-end use cases that take a lot of setup to get started of the Incursion Temple, that now that is the only place in the game that it's particularly profitable to farm any of the core game items. The things that just come as a result of killing monsters, the Incursion Temple drops so many of them that essentially nowhere else is worth running solely for those core game drops. Instead, you can definitely find yourself good loot, but you're going to need to find it by going out of your way to not just kill normal monsters, but instead kill monsters that can drop a Fracturing Orb instead. Or maybe kill monsters that drop catalysts instead. So if you're running Breach, you'll find that the catalysts are going to be a much bigger part of your loot than they normally are, because all the catalysts are up, and Reaver catalysts have gone up as high as 36 Exalts at the moment, which is 1/12 of one Divine Orb. One last thing I did want to touch on as well is just some of the general currency ratios amongst currencies that can drop from anywhere in the game. This is sometimes talked about as a measure of inflation, and I don't think it's really accurate. So for instance, if we have a look at the Divine Orb and look at its value against the Exalted Orb, you'll see that whilst there's actually been a little bit of a dip in the last day or two, this was something that was sharply increasing for a long period of time. This particular thing I think has nothing to do with patch 0.4.0c dropping so much extra loot into the Trade League economy. This is just the fact that Exalted Orbs, kind of like Orbs of Augmentation, they're a really, really useful currency, but you just don't need very many of them, and more of them drop than you can possibly use once you get late in progression. And also with Chaos Orbs have also cratered in price quite a bit recently. The thing with Chaos Orbs is that while they have their uses as well, the thing that's actually currently limiting those uses at the moment is not the Chaos Orbs, it is instead access to Fracturing Orbs. Fracturing Orbs and Chaos Orbs are best friends forever, but Fracturing Orbs are the part that people are running out of, rather than Chaos Orbs. So they've got a lot of Chaos Orbs spare. In fact, all of these shenanigans around the Incursion Temple have probably actually slowed down the amount that Divine Orbs have gone up against the Exalted Orb. And the reason I say that is that the top 5% of the player base are just not picking up Exalted Orbs anymore. They've removed them from their loot filters entirely, and as a result, they've gone from being massive fountains of Exalted Orbs, flooding the economy with them, into actually net consumers of them. They're the people who are buying your Exalted Orbs from you, not because they couldn't loot them themselves, but because they can't be bothered picking them up, and they would rather give you one Divine Orb and save themselves 421 clicks than go through those 421 clicks, picking up all of the Exalts that they need for their own map juicing. Anyways, that's a little bit of a look at the league economy, the kind of broken state that it's in. This is the first time that a Path of Exile 2 league economy has really gotten to the point that it's felt like a stress test, and a stress test that has really broken. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Most people find that the first time they play in a league and participate truly in the broken aspects of a broken economy, it tends to be one of their most favourite leagues of all time. Classic example of this from Path of Exile 1. If you ask a lot of people who've played in the last 5 years what their favourite league is, probably a plurality, maybe even a majority of them will answer 3.23 Affliction League. I did not like Affliction League because it was not the first broken economy I'd participated in. But Affliction League rained down Divine Orbs in a way that had never been seen before. I don't know if it quite got to this point, but it almost felt like 3.23 dropped more Mirrors of Kalandra and more Divine Orbs than had ever dropped in the entire history of the game before then. Then, Grindy Games repeated that with patch 3.24, and no one really seemed to like it. 3.24 was Affliction with maybe 80 to 120% more loot. It wasn't even a small amount that it was increased by, but people didn't seem to enjoy it very much because it didn't have that "this is the first broken economy I've ever been in. This is my first mirror drop. This is the first time I've ever had 500 Divine Orbs." Instead, all those milestones became much more mundane for people. And then when the Freesia events came around and had much more loot again, and this time we're talking about maybe 8 times as much loot with the most min-max strategies as you could get in Affliction League, with many examples of people who in a 1-month event looted double-digit numbers of mirrors personally, and this could be verified through the use of one of the MTX. So we had double-digit numbers of mirrors coming from multiple people, and even then, that league is generally not regarded that highly by much of the player base. And some individuals had fun with that broken economy, many didn't, and once more, it turned out that the first time it happened, it was a lot of fun. Subsequent times, it tended not to be. Anyways, that's the current state of patch 0.4.0. This has been an unintentional limit test of what happens when Grinding Games tweak the knobs on the economy and kind of break them. Some people are going to look at this and say, yep, this is the most fun that Path of Exile 2 has ever been. This is recapturing all of the feel of 3.23 Affliction. And other people are going to look at it and say, yep, this league is dead. I'm out until there's a fix. You should decide which of these outlooks is right for you. Ultimately, there's no wrong or right decision. It's going to come down to personal preference. If you do continue to play in 040 Trade League though, what I would suggest is finding things you can farm that are different to what everyone else is farming. That's really important whenever there's an inflationary economy. So don't be the person who's just running tier 15 maps and just killing random monsters there and occasionally going and doing the incursion temple. Specialize in something. Be the one person that's out selling Reaver Catalysts to all the people who've been making an absolute fortune in their incursion temples, and as a result, have a lot of cash to splash around and need those catalysts. Or be the person that's farming ritual content, king in the miss, generating some of those omens that have massively inflated in price in the last few days. Whatever you decide, make sure you're having fun. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs and your new year have interesting results.